Thanks, Luis. So, hi. My name is Hermes Pique. I work at Facebook. Facebook is a pretty amazing company that pretty much lets me do a lot of things. And one of the many things they let me do is help with accessibility. So today I'm going to try something different. There's not going to be any slides in this presentation. There's nothing to see. Well, the sponsors. Look at the sponsors. And we're going to do a couple of activities. So please, if possible, close your laptops and listen closely. And let's talk about something that is deeply related to accessibility, but is not often associated with software, which is empathy. And by empathy, I mean the textbook definition of the word, which is the capacity to understand another person's perspective. So to illustrate, I'd like to do the first activity. And this might sound a bit weird, but please take out your credit card or debit card. I'm not kidding. Yes. So take your credit card. If you don't have a credit card or debit card, just ask someone else for the credit card or debit card. Yeah. So I'll wait. We good? Yep. So place it in front of you, and now close your eyes. And with your fingers, try to read the numbers. Yes. Try to read the numbers on your credit card. One by one, try to imagine them in your head as you go. It's 4, 9, 6. Yeah. Well, you don't need to say it out loud. I'm just doing that to illustrate. Yeah. So I'll give you a few seconds, and you have your eyes open. Yeah, that's cheating. So yeah, try to do it. A few seconds. Okay. So maybe some of you got it. Was it easy? Was it hard? Hard? Probably a bit harder than you expected, right? So, congratulations. We just put, all of us, we put ourselves in the position of someone who cannot see. And the embossing in credit cards is not really related to blind people. It's for imprinting. But embossing is the basis for Braille. So now, because you tried this, and maybe you never tried reading Braille before, you knew about Braille, but you never tried reading it, so your capacity to understand the needs of someone who reads Braille, it's a little better, so your empathy for them is a little better. So why is empathy so important? So as developers, there's always a disconnect between the way we consume or we experience our products and the way our users do. And specifically, in our world, in the iOS development world, this disconnect starts with the simulator. So the simulator is where we spend most of the time trying our apps. And the simulator is pretty good. I mean, it has access to all of the host computer resources. It never runs out of space. It's fast. It allows for rapid iteration. And we love it. So ask any Android developer what they think of their emulators. We have it pretty good. But it doesn't stop with the simulator. So we tend to have the latest and greatest devices, on OS. So who here has an iPhone 6 or 6 Plus? Raise your hands, please. Yeah. 5? Good. So 50% of users have a 5S or lower. So clearly this room doesn't represent the average user. And I'm pretty sure we might even have an iPhone 6X in the room. So it's not just about the device even. So we're tech savvy. We work in a booming industry. Most likely we have a good data plan and we have access to good Wi-Fi. Congratulations, Luis. The Wi-Fi is very good. And it's not even about technology. Most of us probably live in a first world country. And statistically, motor or visual impairments are not very frequent in our industry. So we're a very specific and fortunate subset of the world. So this disconnect between us and the people who use your apps is quite dangerous. Because we are the first users of our creations, and it's natural for us to think of us when we design or code our apps. Yet, because we represent a very small subset of people, we tend to make mistakes or make the wrong assumptions. And this is specifically relevant for developers who work in isolation. I'm sure some of you are either independent developers or have side projects. I did a few apps on my own. When you're alone, it's very easy to be biased about how the world will perceive your app. Still, most of the time we make conscious decisions to reach audiences different than us. We have limited time and limited resources, so we pick our battles. So, do we support iOS 8 now? Do we support iOS 7? That's about 10% still of iOS users. That's the US version. What about languages? Do we support English? Probably. Espanol? Maybe. Right to left languages? Do we support that? If we have a test plan, do we include accessibility on that? So those are all conscious decisions that we make during development, and there's very good reasons to restrict your audience, especially when you're small or are part of a startup. You have to focus, and there's good reasons not to be broad. But it's the unconscious decisions that are most problematic. So did you notice when your app binary passed the 100 megabytes? Maybe you didn't, maybe you did. Did you notice when the server started sending full HD images instead of thumbnails? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. And suddenly, because you didn't notice, maybe a whole country that doesn't have access to good Wi-Fi, or in average has a very bad connections like Bolivia, cannot use your app anymore. So this becomes a vicious circle. We target a limited audience, which excludes the rest of the world, of course. And since the rest of the world doesn't use your app, we don't hear about them. And we don't pay attention to their needs, and because we don't encounter those needs ourselves, then we keep building for the audience we picked. And we're leaving people out. We might not even notice we are doing that. So the only way to break this vicious circle is with empathy. And I want to focus on one specific kind of user as an example of applying empathy to our work, and that's visually impaired people. This is because I had the opportunity to work with them in mind a lot at my current job. And a little bit about visually impaired. The WHO, the WHO, the World Health Organization, estimates about 285 million people with visual impairments, of which 39 million are blind. And in Spain alone, we have 1 million. Yes, not all of these people have iPhones. But the more accessible apps we make, the more reasons they will have to get an iPhone. And you might think this number is not big enough, and maybe in the context of your user base. And thinking of impaired users as numbers misses one very important thing. That's that the effort you put into accessibility has a much bigger impact in their life. So if you make your app delightful with animations and you spend a few hours or days tweaking animations, that might make the difference between a 4-star and a 5-star rating. But if you spend some time in accessibility, that makes the difference between people with impairments being able to use your app or not at all. So an accessibility user is really worth much more than just a number. And it doesn't require much effort, just mostly empathy. So how do we gain empathy for the visually impaired? If you have the opportunity, I fully recommend witnessing a blind person using their smartphone. I had the opportunity, I did it a few times, and I learned two core things. The first is that performing operations, simple operations on apps, it's really often a struggle. And the second thing I realized is that it was within my reach to help them with that and make that better. So if you don't know anyone blind with a smartphone, there's a more immediate way to increase your empathy for low vision or blind users, and that's very simple. It's use your app as they do. So visually impaired people use something called screen readers, and screen readers are one form of assistive technologies, and it's an assistive technology that reads back what's on the screen. Typically, if you ensure compatibility with screen readers, that also ensures compatibility with other kinds of assistive technologies. So everyone wins. That's why, in general, when we talk about accessibility, we focus on visually impaired. In iOS, the screen reader is called VoiceOver, and it's used both by visually impaired and motor impaired. And VoiceOver is top of class when it comes to screen readers, and it's one of the reasons why many blind people get iPhones. So not only VoiceOver describes the elements on the screen, it also redefines touch gestures to interact without requiring sight and also without precision. And the three most basic gestures when you're using VoiceOver, it's tap to describe an element, double tap to select it, and swipes to change focus on the elements. So basically, the double tap is the tap in the normal non-VoiceOver world. There's more gestures, but those are the most frequently used. To control VoiceOver, there's a framework called UI accessibility. I'm not going to cover the APIs of UI accessibility. There's great WWDC talks about that. Instead, I'm going to do something much more useful. I'm going to teach you the most convenient way to turn VoiceOver on and off. So please take your iPhone this time. I'm not going to ask you for your passbook information. Take out your iPhone, unlock the screen. So go to Settings. Very good. Yeah. So go to Settings, then General, the General option. So in the General option, there should be an accessibility option. Yeah, that's VoiceOver. So once you're within the accessibility option, there's a lot of interesting options there. And I recommend you to explore them later. Right now, we're going to skip all of them, go to the bottom, and go to something called Accessibility Shortcut. That's the last one. So select Accessibility Shortcut, and Accessibility Shortcut is what defines the action of the home button triple tap. So select VoiceOver as the accessibility shortcut. We good? Yep. So go back to the home screen, and now do a triple tap. Tap, tap, tap. That will turn VoiceOver on. It might take a few seconds. And now you have VoiceOver, and you can interact with it. Remember, there's three gestures, the basic ones. With just one tap, you select elements on the screen. With double tap, you basically it's a tap. With one tap, you describe. With double tap, you select, and with swipe, you change focus. Play with it. I see a lot playing with VoiceOver. That's great. To turn it off, and please turn it off. If not, it's going to be a bit weird. Triple tap again on the home screen. I'll give you a few instances. I see you are really interested. Yeah, that's cool. This is awesome. OK, we're good. You can play with it later. So please triple tap on the home screen. Let's turn it off. And that's it. I mean, now you're 3 taps away from testing your app with VoiceOver at any time. And you don't need to do it now. But when you do it, when you do test your app, try doing it with your eyes closed. So the first thing you might notice once you test your app with VoiceOver is that a lot of it just works. And that's because UIKit components support accessibility by default. And will often give VoiceOver the best possible description for themselves. And still, VoiceOver might need a little bit of guidance. And I'll give you an example. Custom icons. So VoiceOver cannot process images. So if we have a gear icon, VoiceOver doesn't know that that is a settings button if it's custom. And if we have a plus button that's custom, VoiceOver doesn't know that it's a button to add something. So in those cases, we need to tell VoiceOver what those things do. So after the conference, you will go back to your place, you play with VoiceOver, try it, and you might more or less find that everything you expect is there. And you might think that, hey, maybe if I just change a few labels and I make it sound a bit better or more specific to my app, I'm done. I'm supporting accessibility, and that's it. And yes, it might be the case that you might turn your app accessible and functional, but you're just doing perfunctory work. You're doing the bare minimum. This is basically something you do to tick accessibility from a checklist. And this is not what empathy is about. And I'll give you two concrete examples of what that means. So this is a very common example. Consider a login form, right? So login form with a password field. And when the user enters an invalid password, the password will wiggle. And it might change color and might become red. But basically, that's it. That's the interaction. Wrong password, it wiggles. So this is an example of using animations as visual cues, and to make something a bit mundane, like a password field, have a little bit of personality. And it's quite common. So the problem is that for blind users, neither the animation nor the change in color is perceptible. So if we don't do anything, voiceover users might not figure out that their login didn't work, and they might stop using the app there. So this is not a great experience, and it kind of defeats the purpose of adding that wiggle animation, which was to make the app more delightful. So how do we make it delightful for voiceover users? How do we convey the same information on voiceover mode? And the answer is pretty simple. Like most accessibility work, you just play a sound. When the password is wrong, you do a bzz sound, and you announce what happened. Invalid user or password. And that's it. The sound replaces the animation. And this is small, it's very small work that goes beyond just defining labels, because we're actually defining behavior specifically for voiceover users. It's still much easier than coding a wiggling animation, though. And yeah, it doesn't take much. So it's very easy to break things for some when you have only yourself in mind when you test. And we probably will not detect the wiggle problem if we don't use our app in VoiceOver. It's really, really hard to see it in the code when you're doing it. So that's one example. Second example, we're going to look at a real app that you might know. So I'm going to turn VoiceOver on my device. Maybe. Assuming my device turns on. Let's see if this works.
VoiceOver on. Gmail. 74 new items.
Yeah.
Double tap to open.
So that's Gmail.
Gmail. 74 new items. Double tap to open. Gmail. Inbox. Button.
So here I have a search of all my EasyJet confirmation emails. And it's basically a list of all the emails. And I'm going to go one by one and read them. And I want you to listen carefully to what happens.
Compose. Search. Search. EasyJet. Your booking EPD76JT.
That's an email.
It's nearly time to select. Checkbox. Uncheck. Double tap to toggle setting. Start. Checkbox. Uncheck. Double tap to toggle setting. EasyJet. Your booking EPD76. Select. Checkbox. Uncheck. Double tap to toggle setting. Start. Checkbox. Uncheck. Double tap to toggle setting.
So you might have noticed that what's happening is that after each email, we're focusing on two checkboxes. And those are the checkboxes to select the email and to favorite the email. So this email list on Gmail is certainly accessible. It is accessible. But for someone who wants to navigate through it, it's a bit cumbersome because they have to do 3 swipes for each email. And also, if you're doing it fast, which is what most visually impaired users do, it's kind of easy to forget to what email the checkbox corresponds to. So the thing is that for non-voiceover users, the cost of showing a checkbox at each side of the email is quite cheap. It's just a small UI element at each side. But for voiceover users, it's as if they had 3 cells for each email. It's a bit annoying. So the alternative is quite simple. It will be to simply hide these checkboxes for VoiceOver and offer the option with a long press, and in VoiceOver world, a long press is double tap and hold, to select or favorite the email. So it will, Twitter actually does this for tweet actions. You don't press and get more options. So it will be mostly like this.
EasyJet, your booking, EasyJet, your EasyJet, your book, EasyJet, Easy, Donna Tripoli. Confirmation, EasyJet, important information EPD 76XG, traveling from Edinburgh.
That's it.
For your flight to London on. Spain block.
So, oh, that sucks. I guess I put it back on. That works. So yeah, we will simply remove that complexity, and we can make the fact that you need to double tap and hold discoverable by simply adding a hint. That's a special accessibility element, the accessibility hint, that says, hey, double tap and hold for select or favorite an email. So will we have thought of these improvements if we don't seriously use the app with VoiceOver? Probably not. I mean, we will think, oh yeah, everything is accessible and labeled. So the best way to discover how to improve our app for VoiceOver is to use it with VoiceOver. There's no magic. And without training, it's practically impossible to detect problems like the wiggling password field or the cumbersome email list from code alone, from looking at the code. By using apps with VoiceOver, we put ourselves in the shoes of impaired users. This is what empathy is all about, and it's a principle that applies to all types of users. So, are you doing right-to-left support properly? Change the language to Hebrew or Arabic and see what breaks. No hard science. Want to see how it really feels to use your app on the go? Try it with a 3G connection for a week. Turn on Wi-Fi, try your app for a week with 3G, just 3G, and see if everything works fast and smoothly. If we limit ourselves to our own perspective, to our own code and tools, we will either ignore the needs of others or simply do the bare minimum work to comply with them. And because there's a natural disconnect between the way we experience our apps and the way our users do, us developers need to make an extra effort to be empathetic. The first step to empathy is awareness. Awareness of the needs of others. Awareness that others have different situations and perspectives. So I hope that, if nothing else, this talk prompts you to explore how others really perceive your app, be it an average user or maybe someone whose life will be significantly better thanks to your efforts. And by doing so, it might make your life better. It did for me. So thank you, and if you're interested in making your app accessible, I'll be around if you want to talk about it or check it out together. So yeah, thanks. Any questions? Oh. Yes, Adam. Oh, sorry. There's another question. We can wait. Yeah.
Great speech. I wanted to ask if you can recommend, or if you know of any tools, third-party tools that help with accessibility or making apps accessible, or any library or any tool you can.
So there's been some projects to make tooling. To be honest, right now the tooling that you get on the device is pretty good. There are some issues is with automated testing of accessibility. That's where the tooling is not really there, because you cannot access, where there's very limited support for accessibility from the simulator, so you need to do it on the device. But I will say that what you have already on the device, just what comes for everyone, it's pretty good. And to get started, it's more than enough. There are some efforts to build some tooling and some automatic detection of missing labels and stuff like that. There was a Kickstarter recently, and I can connect you to that, but I guess the reason we haven't, as a community, invested that much on it yet is because what we have more or less works, and also probably because there's not that many people working on accessibility. So if that's something that interests you, I'll point you in the right direction later.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And to add to that, one thing that you can do if you want to play on hard is 3-finger triple tap on your device, which would turn on curtain mode. So that will make the screen go black.
Yeah.
The app will still work, you just can't see it. So it's the same as putting a blindfold on, only it's only on your device, you can still walk around.
Yeah.
So it's really useful for testing your app, not just with VoiceOver, but with actual complete accessibility, because you can't see anything. So you have to build your mental model and stuff like that. It's really useful. Curtain mode.
Yeah. And something that I personally found super interesting is when you give your app to someone blind, how they perceive your app and what they think of your app, because you have the bare essentials. There's no fluff. And sometimes they might actually get your app much better than the normal user. Yeah, it's super interesting experience. Yep.
Hey, can you shortly tell us about the app that you mentioned that you worked on and how you concretely improved it for visually impaired people?
Yeah. So one of the, well, I help with accessibility in general, but specifically I work in one app called Rooms for Facebook Creative Labs. And basically what we did a full audit of the app, and we used the app. We brought blind users to use the app and detect potential problems, and we just went through every use case of the app and fix any issues. And of course we did labels initially, then we tried, basically Rooms was an app that had a lot of animations, so we tried to translate all those animations into sounds, or at least to make it also feel playful with the descriptions, and also optimize the navigation within the app and group elements together where it made sense. And it turns out that some visually impaired users love it, and they made communities inside the app, and they're using it. So it was a really cool experience. I can go into more details and actually show you stuff inside the app later. Yeah.
So the title of your talk is Empathetic Coding, and when you were learning how to become, or how to make apps extremely accessible, what was your moment of recognition for oh, that's missing something, I should try and help these users? And what's the app that you most aspire to become or simulate when that's the most accessible that you've ever seen and that's done the best way?
Okay, so the aha moment was at Facebook. We have something called bootcamp, and during bootcamp you're encouraged to explore and to see as many teams as possible, and possibly select your project depending on which office you're, well, limited to some constraints of the office you work on. So during that period, I realized that I had never done any accessibility work during my own startup. And in previous companies. So hey, let's learn about this. And I went to just see how blind people use Facebook. And we found some problems during that session. And when I heard about the problems, I kept thinking, wow, that's maybe a 10-minute fix. Or maybe that just takes me at tops 1 hour to fix that. And it will be so easy to go and help. And I did, and it was very rewarding. The other question was about what apps I aspire to. To be honest, I don't have a template app. I say, oh, this is what I aspire to. I think Apple, in general, does a pretty good job in their own apps, in the system apps. It's very hard to find bad stuff within Apple. It's also, in general, most of the Apple apps are relatively simple in terms of structure, so maybe sometimes you need to go a bit more complex. But initially, I looked a lot at what Apple did and used that as an inspiration to understand. And also, at Facebook, we have an amazing team, and we strive to make it state-of-the-art. We're not always make it, but we're very, very conscious about trying. So. I think we're good. Let's go lunch.